We were at a mountaintop in 25, and we're gonna go back to that mountaintop one last time because 25 is just, it's just the height of Isaiah. It's one of the great heights. And then we're gonna move down into the muck and the mire of 26. So if you think about 25 giving us this, picture of, big party at the end of the age. 26 is gonna be good old Isaiah giving us whiplash and yanking us back down into the present. And then 27 gives us another picture of the future. So welcome to how Isaiah works. I think we've sued him for whiplash by now. He never gives us a nice linear step-by-step. It's always up, down, whew. It just, makes the head swim. Okay, let's jump at a word of prayer. Very weird to be mic'd this loudly with a small group here. It's kind of throwing me for a bit of a loop. Oh, loving God. Thank you that you continue to be with us in your word. Oh, Lord, help us to see you better as we explore these wonderful visions you've given through your prophet Isaiah. In Jesus' name, amen. So, highlights in 25, which sets the scene, because oddly enough, 26 comes after 25. That we call math. You probably can't count that high to 26 yet. I'm pandering to the toddler for those of you who can't see who I'm pandering to. Okay, so what were some of the highlights of 25? Mountain, yeah. Yeah, after the end of the 8 weeks, Dr. Ryan empties longs for the mountains constantly, and that's true. What happened on the mountain?
Big feast.
We got a big feast. Feast, and it's the good food. It's the good stuff. What's the significance of the eating all the good stuff?
It's a coronation meal?
Yeah, we got a coronation banquet. How do you make a king? You have a party. It's a coronation banquet. And not just anyone. Why was wine a big deal? A theology of wine. I did get my Trader Joe's $3 bottles of wine a couple days ago. Yeah, not quite the same thing as Isaiah 25. But I'm a snob in other areas, but thankfully not a wine snob.
Peace, right?
Yeah, joy. You celebrate, you drank wine, times of peace and times of joy. Yeah, that's why it's no wonder that Christ's blood is wine, because that is the great meal, the celebration of Christ's victory. So we talk about joy and peace. It's not just any meal. Other highlights in 25.
Feet of strength.
Yeah, feet of strength. Festivus for the rest of us. I hate to break it to you, I used that line in class the other day, and none of my 23-year-old or 22-year-old students had any idea what I was talking about. Part of me died. I'm like, what? You don't? They were looking at me funny. I'm so thankful. I have a couple students who are in their 30s and 40s. I need to keep everybody in my same age group, well, as long as I teach. They thought it was great. These young guys are like, what? Apparently Dr. Teets thinks he's clever. We have no idea why. The feat of strength is a big one, though. When you talk about how big this is and how vitally important this is, I mean, death is all around us right now. It always has been. Death is not anything new, but just how acutely aware when we get the disease counts and the body counts. You know, I listen to Bob and Tom in the morning because I need comedy, and I even can't escape it on Bob and Tom, because what happens the moment my daughter gets out of the car, quick flip the radio on, and then suddenly it is the morning news. And what is it? Here's the COVID cases. Here's the number of deaths. Learning how to live with the victory in the time of, living with this hope of resurrection and the hope of the end of death. There's a great book, just a profound book, came out in April or I pre-ordered in April, it just came out 4 weeks ago. Billings is the author, Dying in the Christian Life. It is a phenomenal examination of what it means for us to not be death deniers. Just a phenomenal book. And
Well, speaking of the
yeah,
kind of cultural death deniers,
Mhm.
I was just thinking about this feat of strength over
Yeah.
death. How much do we spend in terms of resources, time, and our own strength to fend off
right.
death and the results of that are, as we approach it?
Mhm.
You know, we have makeup to hide the wrinkles.
Right.
We have
Yeah.
diet plans that are supposed to be closer to what we need.
Right.
We have fitness programs. You name it. You know, how do we fend off death? And as much money and time we pour into it and strength, we're not able to.
Yeah, Senkbeil, another author who I'm reading right now, has a great book on God's Mercy. I'm going to butcher the title. Just came out, Lexham Press. And he had this great line. He's talking about contemplating mortality. Nice, happy topic. It's a gloomy day. And he said, we always get excited about our little ones, how fast they grow up. Oh, wow, you're so much bigger. And then we automatically assume that we kind of hit the age of, 20? And we stop growing up at that point, because of course we're not falling apart. And meanwhile, I have my bashed up elbow and all kinds of fun stuff. But Billings, really just a profound examination that to be Christian means we live life in death, because Christ is the victory. But we acknowledge the reality of death. Here, though, we got a party. Other things you noticed in 25, just this gem of a text. So, feat of strength, we got death defeated. We also had another feat of strength there. We had the infamous problem of good old, poor old Moab. Yeah, yeah. Swimming in dung. And not just any dung that is named as a pun after your name, and it's a Hebrew pun. Yeah, but that's the other part of what it means to have Christ coming back again. It's always the defeat of the enemy. You never have just a victory. You have a victory that includes the defeat of the enemy. And that's where Moab and Edom are just two really important nations. If you want to, I have about 22 pages written on how Edom functions that way right now. And really how those two small nations become this pattern of evil. Moab, Lot's daughters are the reason for Moab's existence. Edom would be Esau and his kids. And how Isaiah always preserves that tension. You never just have a big party. There's always those excluded. And think about Jesus' parable, Jesus' miracles, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is horrible to contemplate at times. Yeah. I long for Christ to come back soon, but what will that mean for my neighbor or a family member? And that's where this really just gets tough. Other things. Take a look now, and then we're going to jump into, take a look at 25 verse 9. Yes, once again, I lied at my starting point. 25 verse 9 is the other major dynamic here. So 25 verse 9. I did warn you, I get excited about words like that, which means I probably need to find something better to get excited about. Somebody bust out 25 verse 9.
It will be said on that day, behold, this is our God. We have waited for him, that he might save us. Keep going.
Yeah, we'll stop right there. Okay, yeah, go for it. It's a good
This is the
passage.
Lord. We have waited for him. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation.
Yeah, it'll be said on that day. That day is always pointing us to Christ's first and second comings. And note the tense of the verb. I know, just what you need, grammar at this hour in the morning. And I recognize it's not morning, I think. 3-hour strategic planning meeting, I don't know what time it is, but that's what 3-hour meetings do. It's past tense. This is waiting after the fact. Any other observations in 25? We'll eventually have to leave this mountain down to go to the muck and the mire a little bit. Who would have thought the word that would be that important? Okay, let's take a look at 26, starting at verse 1. So we had that day back in 25, and now we see that day again. But now things are a little bit different. Somebody bust out 26, starting at verse, well, let's do 1 and 2. 26, 1 and 2.
In that day, the song will be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. He sets up salvation as walls and bulwarks. Open the gates, that the righteous nation that keeps faith may enter in.
Okay, we have a that day, but the that is a little bit of a different that. Once again, we got to sue Isaiah for whiplash. Again, hard to sue somebody who's been dead for 2,800 years, or somebody else do the math. What do you notice in verses 1 and 2? We're now talking about people. These aren't the same people that were just singing back in 25. It'll be said on that day, this is our God. We have waited for him. Past tense, already over. Waiting's great. Waiting is perfectly fine after the waiting's over. Okay, waiting is perfectly fine when it's not waiting anymore. Yeah.
A little paradox.
Yeah. As I used to get accused by my Calvinist classmates at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You Lutherans, you love your paradoxes. To which I said, we Lutherans are biblical. But we had a good laugh and moved on. We now have the cry of people who are under pressure, suffering. They have a cry of confidence, but the only time you need a strong city is when you are under attack. So now what we get in 26, and this is that great, this is 24 to 27, it's just great fun. This is Isaiah's one of Isaiah's major vivid descriptions of the second coming of Christ. What jumps out at you? Verses 1 and 2. Okay, yeah.
Why is the righteous nation not in this city?
Yeah. Yeah, and suddenly You'll notice Isaiah was nice enough to give us no really clear transitions. It just subtly, you're walking along and like, whoa, we must have taken a wrong turn someplace here. Echoes actually Psalm 24. Who is the king? Or Psalm 24. The idea of who can enter the kingdom. Psalm 24. And that's Psalm 20. No, Psalm 23 is different than Psalm 24. Lift up.
24:3 is it? Who shall
Yeah.
ascend the hill of the
Right.
Lord? Is that the-
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for finding it faster than me. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand? Okay, cheater. And then again, it's not that I don't have a touchpad on my iPad that should get me there faster. But the question in 24 is, who can actually enter God's presence? And this is now back to 26. Yeah, we have this image that salvation hasn't completely come yet. Who can actually stand? And those echoes, lift up your heads, O mighty gates in 24. Who's the King of glory? Who may enter? Yeah, other things you see going on. Yeah, so we have this tension here of now life's a mess. How are we going to be able to get in? Now look at how this person that dwells in Zion is defined. Take a look at verse 3. Well, you keep him in perfect peace. I'm trying to figure out which monitor to look at. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock. We are not at the party we were in 25. Yeah, anything that strikes you in these first 4 verses? One, the righteous people, open the gates so the righteous people can come in. In other words, get the place ready so we can dwell in security, because we're not there yet. Anything else that just strikes you? Yeah, look at the dominant word in 3 and 4. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord is an everlasting rock. Because he trusts in you, going back to verse 3. The big debate in Isaiah is, do you trust or not? So if you think about this in kind of its bigger picture, Isaiah is all, and this goes back to Isaiah 7. Do you trust God to care for you, or are you going to run after Assyria to bail you out? Which is a dumb move. How do we define who's part of this? It's all about trust.
Could you remind us about the Assyria, trusting in Assyria?
Oh, thanks. Too much time in Isaiah. No, you can't possibly have too much time. The big debate in Isaiah 1 to 39 is, what do you do when the Assyrian Empire is coming? When the Assyrian Empire is coming, you have a problem. The Assyrians are scary, they're nasty, they're ugly, and they will destroy you. So option number 1, you find friends, and that's what Israel ultimately does, and it doesn't work too well. Aram is not a good pal. They just get annihilated. Number 2, you go to Egypt for help. Egypt and Assyria are always fighting with each other. These countries are now caught in the middle. Egypt has this nasty habit of letting you down when things get ugly. They'll help you when it's easy. The third option is to surrender. And why is it so bad to surrender to Assyria theologically? Where are they living? They're in the promised land. They're in the land God promised them. You don't give that up. In the case of Isaiah 7, and we also see this in 30, 31, and 29 as well, is the moment you trust in your own smarts to take care of yourself, whether it's good political manipulations or trust in your idols, human pride will be your doom. So anyway, that's where Ahaz has that great option. I won't put the Lord to a test. And that's Ahaz just not wanting to, that's not Ahaz being pious. That's Ahaz who's trusting himself and to form an alliance with Assyria. So that theme of who do you trust? In 1 to 39, it's don't trust the foreign nations to bail you out. And we have a bit of a shift in 40-41 where idolatry becomes the major problem of trust. But you can't really separate them. It's all First Commandment violations. Yeah, good question. Anything else here? Let's take a look at 5 and 6. For he has humbled the inhabitants of the height, the lofty city. He lays it low. He lays it low to the ground, casts it to the ground. The foot tramples it, the feet of the poor, the steps of the needy. So you start wrestling. What does human sin look like in the Bible? So much of it is trusting yourself to save yourself. And that's where we get that great reversal. Inhabitants of the height, Edom, it's actually a possible reference to Edom right there. But this idea of the proud are the ones who think they can save themselves. And this goes way back to, well, what story of in the book of Genesis is all about human pride getting into a heck of a lot of trouble? Tower of Babel stuff all over again. What do they do in Tower of Babel? We're going to build a tower to get to heaven so we won't be scattered. And what does God have to do? He has to figure out what that little zit is on the plains of Shinar to figure out what's going on. It's laughable what human pride does, and devastating. And if you think in the New Testament, we have so many examples. Mary's song. It's all the exaltation of the poor and the proud being humbled. God cares for those who can't take care of themselves. Before we flip this slide, any other things that just jump out at you? We have here a psalm of confidence in the face of bad stuff happening. It's probably the best way to view it. Now let's shift over to verse 7.
Sorry, I had to do a little research here.
Okay. I don't know, I'm almost afraid.
Aleppo in Syria.
Yeah.
There's got this lonely hill, they built a citadel on top.
Mm-hmm.
Would the people of Israel know that as a place, significant place in terms of a well-established fortification? In the top, in this verse 5, for he has humbled the inhabitants of high, the lofty city, lays it low, and I've forgotten where Assyria has its borders.
Yeah. Yeah. Aleppo would be Aram, so when I become Pope someday, we will not have Assyria and Syria. Two totally different places, very easily confused. Potentially, although it's a stock image.
Yeah.
When you're dealing in this time period, military history-wise, it's kind of like what? Revenge of the Sith. I have the high ground.
Yes.
If you have the high ground, the only thing that's going to cost you is you get starved out. The Assyrians get pretty good at taking down fortifications. But for the most part, if you have your citadel, your refuge, and the high ground, you're perfectly safe. And that's why Psalm 46, our God is our refuge and strength, with Reformation coming up. I'm surprised Reformation Sunday apparently is this Sunday. Is where that becomes that. That becomes the image. I'm trying to come up with a good equivalent for us. You want to know what's going to keep you safe? It's a fortress. It's the high ground. And here they get flipped down. Yeah.
Now, in the study Bible, which I'm using, it says that God has laid waste the enemy stronghold, Babylon. That's what they're using in verse 5.
Right.
They say that that's what it's referring to, that they would know that.
You're getting a wince from me, which is, feel free to play. I need to have a mask on. My poker face is a lot better when I have a mask on. At this part of Isaiah really is doing everything in his power to keep this as generic as possible. In 24 to 27, that's why Moab was so bizarre in 25. Moab is the only real place name we have in the entire section until the tail end of 27. Okay, let's zip over to 7. Isaiah 26, verse 7. Yeah. So now we shift gears, and now the plea of the people gets a heck of a lot more urgent. So look at how they're praying. This first line, the path of the righteous is level. You make level the way of the righteous. In the path of your judgments, O Lord, we wait for you. Okay, the moment I get into path language, I get excited. If I'm dealing with a road, I'm dealing with Exodus language. The way that Isaiah describes salvation, he has two basic Old Testament stories he uses all the blooming time. Creation and Exodus. Exodus in the Old Testament is the great saving event in the entire Old Testament. So now they have a path home. That language of judgment, there's your loaded theological word for 2,000 Alex. It's not just destruction of evil. This is that word. For those of you keeping score at home, it would be mishpat. It's God's setting things in order with God's intended plan. How's that for a sufficiently vague definition? What are the judgments? The judgments are taking things back to where they should be in Genesis 1 and 2. Now, verse 9 gives us a really good voice for what it means to wait. And that's where 25 was wonderful and powerful, but the problem with 25 is we don't live in an Isaiah 25 world. I keep hoping one of these days. Those prayers just get more and more urgent. But look, what strikes you in verse 9? My soul yearns for you in the night. My spirit within me earnestly seeks you. For when your judgments are on the earth, the inhabitants of the world learn righteousness. Now, suddenly we're in first person. It's not our. And now we have the cry of somebody longing for longing for faith, begging for Christ to come to be present. And look at how he's negotiating with God. Why is he seeking God? For when this happens, the people are going to learn righteousness. But verse 10, by the way, if you take a look at 10, if favor is shown the wicked, he does not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness, he deals corruptly. He does not see the majesty of the Lord. Come back, but there are going to be the prideful ones are still going to resist you. Let's skip over to verses 17 and 18. So what's happened here, verse 16, we'll go verse 16 onward. As we start out with kind of a nice generic psalm. If you think about the tone of the beginning of this, okay, good refuge language, pretty happy-go-lucky. They're not really happy-go-lucky, but he's pretty darn stoic. Now take a look at this. Verses 17 and 18. We go from, okay, God, you are a refuge, great theoretical statement. Okay, nice. And now what do we have? Somebody bust out 17 and 18.
Like a pregnant woman who writhes and cries out in her pains, when she is near to giving birth, so were we because of you, O Lord. We were pregnant, we writhed, but we have given birth to win. We have accomplished no deliverance in the earth, and the inhabitants of the world have not fallen.
Now the tone just shifted on us. How does this plea strike you?
Childbirth is my version of hell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is always the awkward moment of being guy the moment you get into the childbirth imagery in Isaiah. You're like, okay. And it becomes actually a stock image in Isaiah. Childbirth, a labor that produces. However, look at what's the scary part of the childbirth imagery here?
No joy at the end.
No joy. So take a look at what Hezekiah does with it in Isaiah 37, verse 3. Isaiah 37, verse 3. That was deceptively difficult to say out loud. Setting here, Hezekiah has a bit of a problem. He's surrounded by the Assyrians. They said to him, thus says Hezekiah, this is a day of distress, of rebuke, and of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to bring them forth. this, well, let's be, a common image becomes an image of utter futility. There's been some really, but now, so we have this pretty painful image here in 26. Take a look at what Isaiah does to this image in 66, 7 to 9. We're going to skip to the very end. Say 66, 7 to 9. So Isaiah, yeah. You are faster than me on the Psalms. Okay, so somebody bust out 66, 7 to 9.
Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came upon her, she delivered a son. Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall a land be born in one day? Shall a nation be brought forth in one moment? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the point of birth and not cause to bring forth, says the Lord? Shall I, who cause to bring forth, shut the womb, says the Lord, your God?
Okay, look at what we have. Okay, once again, Isaiah's given us whiplash. First two references. Scary, horrible, awful, painful futility. And for those of you who've dealt with that, this is always the challenge when you deal with metaphors like this, knowing that depending on what your own real life experience is, it's even tougher and how rough that is. And frankly, for Isaiah's day, this would have been very normal and horrible. But look at what he does. You have this image that leads to futility. And then at the end of Isaiah, what do we have? We have this great reversal. So much so that it's really back to pre-fall. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came upon her, she delivered a son. So Isaiah, now look at how Isaiah takes this image from daily life and uses it and transforms it. Questions or reactions on that?
This is referring to a promise, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The promise is assured, fulfilled.
The people are lamenting in 26. And by lament, they are, God, we thought we could count on you. No, they even started out with this nice little statement of hope. And now what's the reality? Right now, God, I thought I could count on you. Instead, everything we're doing is leading to death and futility. What's great about this sort of lament is awesome. Think about how they're talking to God here. Isaiah 63, 64, even more so, where we have this invitation to be just utterly blunt with what we're dealing with when it comes to God. Yeah, other questions or comments? It's always a look up. I always like it when I ask, I say, any questions, and I avoid eye contact. It's highly effective. There's a colleague I covered a sabbatical for at Concordia Chicago years ago who famously taught class with his eyes closed, which is kind of impressive. Okay, 19 is one of the highlights in Isaiah. So 26 verse 19. Onward. So we go from struggling with life falling apart here. We've waited, we wait for you, we long for you. Everything we do accomplishes nothing. And now, verse 19 is one of the highlights in Isaiah. Somebody bust that out.
Your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy. For your dew is a dew of life, and the earth will give birth to the dead.
And verse 20 while you're at it.
Come, my people, enter your chambers, and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while, until the fury has passed by.
The Old Testament hints at the resurrection of the dead. What do we have here in verse 19? There's no hinting here. when we talk about, I look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. I think I've heard that someplace. It seems vaguely sort of kind of familiar, maybe. The response to everything we do is futile is the promise of the resurrection. In terms of the Old Testament, this is one of three kind of major points where where what is oftentimes hinted at is just wonderfully explicit. Yeah, the other passage, we won't look at it, is Daniel 12, 1-3. Not part of the Sunday school part of Daniel. No lion's den by 12. It's all kind of wild and crazy images. Verse 20. Come, my people, enter your chambers and shut the door behind you. Oh, what do you think? What is Isaiah referencing there with the language of shut your doors behind you and hide yourself a little while until the fury has passed by?
Is that COVID quarantine?
Oh man, not funny. You know, I long for the day in which COVID jokes are humorous. Yeah, I had a student in class yesterday who had his like fourth grader with him, and I was bugging him. I'm like, oh, you got your research assistant. And he said, you realize you tested positive for COVID. And he was joking. I'm like, that's not funny at all. That's highly uncool, highly uncool. I was like, thanks a lot.
Well, being as you mentioned Exodus, this reminds me of the Passover.
Passover language, definitely. Yeah, where the blood saves. Also, Noah.
Oh, yeah.
The language is shutting the door behind you. The only difference, Noah's story is a little bit different. Noah doesn't shut the door to the ark, God shuts the door for him. So we talk about how that Noah story, you actually see it in 24, how Noah, the global flood that punishes the earth in Noah, is a foretaste of the final coming. There's always problems. You can't flood an earth a second time. He promised. So like in Isaiah 24, we saw that where instead of getting a flood, you get an earthquake. But here it really is that, where Noah is that pattern of God saving the remnant while punishing evil. And who would have thought that story in which I have this silly play school Noah's Ark set in my office, because it's such an odd thing for kids to play with. It's such a major story. Now, they don't have any of the dead bodies of all the people who got killed by the flood. That's why I don't like it.
This ark represents the hope.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I also have a Pope Francis doll in my office, but that is not a theological commentary. It was on sale at a going out of business store, a business sale, and I brought that home. I got why did you bring that home? So I do have a Pope Francis plush doll at a seminary office, which is where it should be, next to an Ozzie Smith bobblehead, which is far more superior, but not theological. Okay. So we have this language of hope in the resurrection. And then shutting your door is also probably a reference to, I'm going to use the word, I don't like it, heaven as in being with Jesus where we are with Jesus until the resurrection. The Bible doesn't use the word heaven for that typically, actually ever, but it's being with Jesus until the big party at the end. Always concerned about the big party because, as I may have said here, I'm always concerned I'm going to be planted facing the wrong direction. Resurrection dead will happen. I'll be trying to figure out what's going on because I'll be facing the wrong way. Questions or comments here in 19 and 20? I know there's a lot to process. I don't even have my cup of coffee to slow me down. Linus, yeah.
There was a group of Jews who didn't believe in the resurrection. Those were the
Good old Sadducees.
And they didn't believe in a bodily resurrection?
Nope.
Okay.
They were your run-of-the-mill political elites. When you control the temple, you control the economy. It's a pretty good gig.
So how would they, maybe we don't know, but you take verse 19 here, and then you show that to a Sadducee.
They only have the Torah. So the Torah is only authoritative.
Yeah.
So feel free to ask. I like, the moment you get into other religious groups, I always get nervous. Thanks for that softball, though. I was a little nervous there for a second. Because I get what's the Calvinist interpretation of this, take on this text? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that many Calvinists. Now, 26 verse 21 and 27 verse 1, we go from hope of the resurrection to now a fun image. 21, behold, the Lord is coming out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. And the earth will disclose the blood shed on it, and no more cover its slain. So yeah, more final judgment language.
Is this calling the people of earth the sons of Cain here?
Pretty much. The language of blood in Isaiah, and we all think of blood of Christ that saves the world. That's kind of our kind of Pavlovian response. In the book of Isaiah, blood is, I can think of no cases where blood is actually a positive image in Isaiah. Blood in Isaiah is typically referring to blood guilt. So the idea that the earth needs to be restored because of human sin done upon it. When we're talking, and that's when we're talking hope, we're not talking just me and Jesus. The Bible never really does me and Jesus on a good day. Individualism is just not something the Bible does at all. But it's always us with Jesus and the rest of creation being restored. And you cannot separate creation from what happens to us. Which is kind of nice. As much as I have a hard, I don't know about you, I don't visualize myself well as a disembodied spirit. I think that'd be weird. I mean, I know myself as a flesh and blood human being. Breakable, which is what I have to keep telling my 12-year-old daughter. Man, I'm convinced her job is to destroy Dad. I was sitting next to her on the futon before I left. And she just, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get up here and probably clobber me. She's like, yes, Dad. I'm like, okay, so she did. She's far tougher than I am. Then again, she got braces and was perfectly fine about it. I would have passed out the moment I got into that orthodontist. Now go over to 27 verse 1, which actually, this is a good example where the chapter divisions aren't in the original Bible, because 27 verse 1 actually goes with 26 previous verse. 26, I guess, 21. Okay, what do we see in those first 3 words? In that day. Oh, yes. Once again, we're talking Christ's first and second comings. And now we bump into a fun critter. Who do you bump into?
Leviathan.
Yeah, the Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. You're wincing. No. Okay. Yeah, why is this kind of bizarre? Leviathan, the fleeing serpent.
Is that like Eden, we had the snake?
Yeah,
Oh, he eats a big snake.
yeah. The problem is what to do with the Leviathan. Last I checked, dragons aren't something I haven't really seen too many dragons lately.
They're extinct.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or somehow some buried in some or hiding somewhere in a jungle that we can't see, that we can't find them. The language of Leviathan is theologically very important. But to understand Leviathan, we have to understand the religion of Israel's neighbors. Leviathan here is a symbol, and what Isaiah is doing is how do I describe evil personified? I'm going to steal a story from my neighbors and put it in good theological terms. When you bump into Leviathan, so there are a couple critters. Leviathan and Rahab are the two. Rahab, just so you don't panic, the monster is not the same as Rahab who bails out the guys in Joshua. the names are spelled differently in the original language. I only struggled with that for about 2 years before I finally realized why I couldn't make a connection. Religion of Israelites' neighbors always talked about this constant battle between the gods and chaos. Chaos wars is how they describe things. Their creation accounts are not this, let there be light. There are, you got to slaughter Tiamat and you got to slaughter this. They're chaotic. So Leviathan is a figure of evil personified. Leviathan, let's make Leviathan really easy. Leviathan's the serpent from the garden. Leviathan's Satan. So we have this great image of Satan here with Leviathan, where Isaiah is drawing upon and using stuff his hearers would have known about. Divine warrior who slaughters. Dragon language. Oh, where's the dragon located? You should be having Revelation flashbacks here. This is very Revelation-like. Although Revelation alludes to Isaiah more than any other book, so we shouldn't be too surprised.
Dragons in the sea.
Yeah. When I see water in the Bible, it does not symbolize baptism. Sorry. Occasionally it does. I love doing this to my poor SEM students. Pastor McDowell is laughing because he lived that reality. The other two of you have been saved from that reality. Well, yeah, every drop of water is baptism. Actually, most of the time, every drop of water in the Bible is chaos, forces of evil opposed to God's salvation. At the very least, an image of death. So we have the Satan, and where does Satan dwell? Of course, he dwells in the place of chaos. Which is why in Revelation 21, there's no more sea. In the final vision of the new creation, the sea is no more. And what John is there seeing is, by the way, is this. It's more perfect than the original perfection, which I know that doesn't make philosophical sense, but that's how the Bible portrays it. In terms of what Isaiah does with this, take a look at Isaiah 51, 9 to 11. Isaiah 51, 9 to 11. How do you describe victory? 51, 9 to 11. Yeah, go for it.
Awake, awake, is that the right word?
Yep.
Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake, as in days of old, to generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep? Who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away.
Yeah, similar pattern that we've seen. Awake, awake, put on strength. Didn't you do this? When we're dealing with suffering, we are begging God, we beg God to, one, pay attention, and didn't you do this before? That Rahab imagery is actually dried up the sea. What event does that sound a heck of a lot like? Exodus language. You're back to the original Exodus. Other questions or puzzlements? If Leviathan is a dinosaur, by the way, your reasoning would say that dinosaurs are Satan personified, which is why Leviathan is not a dinosaur. Sorry. I hope I didn't get myself into trouble by saying that. But it's not. Instead, it is this force of evil that God destroys. It's not something that was from a previous time. It is a reality that God's fighting against even now. Satan on a leash.
These descriptors of the Leviathan, the fleeing serpent,
Yeah.
serpent, twisting serpent. Only time I've ever seen a serpent twist is whenever you kill it.
Yeah. It's the death throes. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a great image.
Or when it tries to kill you, constrictors wrap around you.
Yeah, I was at a pastor's conference in Arkansas a couple years ago. It was really nice until I went for the walk and they said, oh, by the way, Arkansas has an amazing number of poisonous snakes. Okay, a guy said, yeah, you can borrow my kayak. By the way, you don't want to get too close to the edges. The snakes might drop down on you. I decided to go for a walk. You can feel free to call me a wimp. Bears I can deal with. Yeah, this is the same guy who said, yeah, I killed a couple snakes on my property, went to the zoo with my grandkids the following day and found out those were they were pygmy rattlesnakes. He didn't even realize they were toxic. Okay, it's as pretty as Arkansas is. Boring old Indiana is not all that bad sometimes. Okay, now we shift images for our final image. So we go from defeat of evil, and what Isaiah here is doing is now going to be piling on images of hope. So we went from our life stinks, and everything we do is utter futility, utterly wasted, to God's going to punish. It's in that day. Now, we have another in that day. I take a look at verses 3 onward. This is crazy, actually really cool. In that day, happens to be in the right chapter. Yeah, I was in 26. I was like, in that day, a pleasant vineyard, sing of it. I, the Lord, am its keeper. Every moment I water it. Lest anyone punish it, I keep it night and day. So tell me about a vineyard. Talking about this up at, where you've done some work. I preached at Living Waters on Sunday.
Hey.
I'm preaching there actually this coming Sunday too.
What do you think of their new sanctuary?
It is cute and really nice.
It is.
Last time I preached there, they were in the food bank.
Yep.
So, Living Waters, Highway 33, not quite to the edge of the earth, but pretty close. Yeah. They informed me that there are vineyards in Indiana. I tried to, it's not quite the same thing. But what is a vineyard? It's a place that requires all kinds of work to make it happen. We talked about wine language. Small problem though. We bumped into it. There is an earlier vineyard in Isaiah. I'll go back to Isaiah chapter 5. Yeah, I mean, this was, are you here, 3-year lectionary here at St. Peter? Or, okay, good. So this would have been up, 3 weeks ago or so? Yeah, I talked about it in my Greek readings class because I didn't want to talk about Greek in Greek readings. You have to know a lot of Hebrew to be in Greek readings with me. So, chapter 5 is this great song of a vineyard, but there's a small problem with the vineyard. It starts out great. The problem is verse 4. Oh, verse 4. Yeah, when I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? The vineyard is that stock image to describe God's people. He is the one who takes care of them and gives them everything they could possibly need. Unfortunately, for this vineyard, it didn't turn out so well. It never yielded fruit. And you get that. And look at verse 5, verse 7, really kind of is the punchline. He looked for justice, and behold, bloodshed, for righteousness, and behold, an outcry. For those Hebrew-friendly people, those are great puns. It's mishpat, punning on the words. It is, the word for justice is punned with the word for injustice. In other words, it's a perverted version of it. So, bad vineyard. Now go back to 27. What do we discover about the vineyard in 27? Yeah, I have no wrath. Would that I had thorns and briars to battle, I would march against them. I would burn them up together. The old vineyard was decimated. But Isaiah now takes that image from 5, which is chapter 5 is pretty negative. Yeah, pretty negative. Yeah. For those of you who like law gospel categories, we call that law. And we move into pure gospel here. It just goes on. Verse 27, verse 6. In the days to come, Jacob shall take root, Israel shall blossom and put forth its shoots, and fill the whole world with fruit. We have the Song of the Vineyard part 2 here in Isaiah 27. We went from bad vineyard to now a restored vineyard. Oh, deep breath on a nice cloudy day with the Anything, as we reflect on 24 to 27, what strikes you about these really key chapters in Isaiah?
Kind of contrast with each other.
Yeah, I mean, we get to these really wonderful contrasts. We get global destruction 24, global restoration 25, tension of waiting, and 26, 27. And we live in that tension between the ages. Yeah, other things that strike you. Here we get that glimpse of the end. Isaiah struggles to describe it because it's hard to describe something we've never experienced. If you jump ahead, take a look at 28, what do we discover? This is vintage Isaiah, and this will set us up for next week.
So it's titled Judgment on Ephraim.
Yeah. Woe to the proud crowns on the drunkards of Ephraim. Isaiah is addressing so many issues of his day and age. 24 to 27 gives us this glimpse of the future. Now we're back. That word, what do your English translations have for the first word of 28 verse 1? It's a better word than that. The word, I usually would translate that as woe. The Hebrew is really a hard word there, hoi, because it's a Hebrew way of saying ugh. The language that we're going to see these woes in 28, 29, 30, 31, 33 is the language of woe here isn't damning people. Instead, it is God, it's the language of lament. Why do you lament? Because somebody's already dead. So this is the prophet lamenting over the state of the people. So next week, promise you we'll do 30 and then 34, 35. 34 and 35 are two other just major chapters in the book of Isaiah. 34 will be destruction, and guess what 35 will be? You're on to the pattern. Okay, let's close with the words of blessing. Almighty God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen. Hey, thanks for jumping into this fray. There's always 26 is tough. There's a lot going on in 26. Definitely one of those harder chapters in terms of, it's so much easier to throw you in a gospel text because it's a little bit easier to kind of get the landscape. Here we got a lot of images going on.
I really have always told people my version of hell is childbirth with no baby to show at the end of it. I didn't know I was
Look at how,
talking about Isaiah.
yeah, it's really interesting how Isaiah uses that image. If twice there's,
Yeah, I did it 3 times.
there's actually there's a really good book on it. I mean, Isaiah's vision in the family of God, and where the author actually just looks at childbirth imagery in that book of Isaiah. It's a really interesting read. Definitely a technical audience, but it was a lot of profound insights from how do you trace that metaphor, and how do you unpack the metaphor, and that's where Isaiah's drawing upon you're dealing with a time and place where infant mortality is constant, and death in childbirth is hardly unusual. So you get into how he takes that horrible image, and this is now a bigger pattern. Just a really fascinating image. Fascinating. Again, the standard qualification, abstract way. There's always dealing with it in an abstract way as opposed to personal.
And you didn't have to go on the delivery?
Although I don't know. That was my wife's labor, Coach. I did, although let me tell you, I take my temperature so often, I'm convinced I can tell you when I'm ovulating because I'm taking my temperature constantly these days. It's just me.
No, I didn't have to worry about that.
I've been doing our life of constant temperature checks. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is that what the Sims got you doing right now? Is temperature checks?
Oh, we've got 4 of us in our family with 4 different schools.
Right.
And my wife teaches in Northrop, my son goes to Concordia High School, my daughter goes to Emmanuel St. Michael. And nothing like having allergy season upon us for the past week and a half with my daughter with her fall sniffle that's giving us mild heart attacks. Yeah.